All right, guys, for me, it's actually Monday morning right now, and I've already been at it for an hour or two just trying to get this 2005 Express Dana 70 full floating axle cleaned up. And the goal is by the end of today's video, I want to get this ready to install underneath my 99 K2500 Suburban. Now, if you saw the last upload, or one of my last uploads, I'm not sure which order this is going to go in here. The main objective here is to make a rear axle that's a little bit wider so it looks a whole lot better, but also by swapping to this little bit newer Dana 70 axle, I'm also going to be gaining a limited slip differential and disc brakes where my 14-bolt full floater in the Suburban has drum brakes and an open carrier. So we got 3 benefits that we're going to be seeing by switching to this axle. But first we got to get rid of a lot of this rust, because this axle did come from the East Coast. I think upstate New York somewhere is where the junkyard was. And as you can kind of see, I've been wire wheeling it a little bit. This is sort of the before, just kind of flaky, crusty rust. And over here, this side looks a whole lot better, just kind of the 4.5-inch angle grinder with 2 different wire brush attachments. I already got this end kind of painted up. And what my objective here is, I'm going to get the brakes and everything rebuilt, all brand new. And I'll have all that stuff painted. I'll have the center section painted, and I'm just going to leave basically the axle tubes unpainted until I test fit it, because I need to make sure my spring perches are in the final position. One quick note on those, I had a couple of people ask me about the spacing and why I actually changed perches. I kind of went over that, or I breezed over it in the video, but basically the van perches were probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches wider. So it wasn't about the pinion angle, it was about the spacing for the leaf spring width. That's why we had to move the spring perches. And the shocks on the Express, they both were mounted on, I believe, the rear of the axle, where the GMT400 trucks have one on the front, one on the back. So we're doing new perches and new shock mounts. Just to kind of give you an idea of what this old brake stuff looks like. So So these are the old parking brake shoes. They look pretty awful, and these are the old backing plates. I mean, they're pretty much just rusted through, and of course they did get bent and damaged from shipping. So I got everything stripped down. I also stripped the wheel hubs apart, and the whole reason I did this is just so much easier to clean up these surfaces with no studs in them, and that'll also allow me the opportunity to really clean the threads on the wheel studs. And also another cool thing, when you put them in your welding table like that, it's really easy to take the wire wheel and grind up the back of them. These are the 4 studs that go onto the brake caliper mount. Guys, down here, as you can see, everything just looks really, really nasty, and we're gonna clean it up and make it look a whole lot better. I already have the opposite side done. This kind of over here, I'll show you what it looks like. We've got new backing plates, new everything. So that's just a bare backing plate. This is what it looks like when you press the studs in to the painted up caliper mount. The new hub, that thing's all set, or not a new hub, that's the existing hub, cleaned up, painted up, and the original studs reinstalled. I also went ahead and just painted the flange on the end of the axle shaft. So everything, it pretty much looks well, not brand new, but it looks a whole lot better than it did before. And when this thing is all done, it's gonna be kind of a semi-gloss black, and it'll be looking good. Now, my plan for this Suburban, I know you guys give me a hard time for talking a lot, but I'm almost done, I promise. The plan for the Suburban eventually is gonna be having a really nice paint job. It's not gonna be like a show truck, but it's gonna look really slick and really nice. So since we're going through the effort of swapping the axles, I want it to look pretty good, even though the rest of the truck doesn't look great for now. So anyway, right now I've got to spend some time with a wire brush, the wire wheel again. I'll get this stuff all brushed up the final time. Don't forget, if you're working with rust, I normally don't wear a respirator, but anytime I'm wire wheeling with rusty stuff, you gotta wear them because that crap will get in your lungs and it's no good. So safety gear, some grinding, and I'll catch up with you in just a little bit. It took pretty much the entire day yesterday to get everything prepped and cleaned up. Got a lot of parts painted, and I even welded the axle tubes into the housing. And for the most part, we're ready to put this thing back together. I quickly wanted to give call it a PSA about your personal protective equipment, you know, your safety gear. I'll admit, I'm not a stickler for it. I try to wear safety glasses. I really have to wear hearing protection anytime I'm grinding because of my ears. They get a little bit sensitive. I didn't always wear hearing protection, and now I kind of paid the price for that. But your lungs, that's one thing that you definitely want to pay attention to, especially if you're grinding or wire wheeling, you know, rusty metal, because that stuff gets everywhere. I mean, I swept the shop like 4 times after doing this whole job yesterday. So just get some kind of a respirator. I don't care if it's a cheap dust mask you get like for doing drywall. I actually bought these from Harbor Freight. I got 2 of them because one plugged up pretty quickly. $17 for this thing. It's just a simple respirator. Those filters were actually white when I started the job, and you can see how much brown, rusty dust and crap is in there. And so that means all that is not in my lungs because the inside, well, it's pretty clean. So pick one up. I mean, yeah, it doesn't look cool or whatever, and they kind of get in the way. You seem to sweat a lot more whenever you're wearing a respirator, but your lungs will thank you. And I kind of wish I started wearing one a lot sooner when I was young, because I never used to wear safety glasses or anything when I was a kid working on trucks. And anyway, that's just my PSA for the day. So protect your lungs, protect your eyes, protect your ears. Let's see. So I got the whole housing prepared. I quickly mentioned that I welded the axle tubes into the housing. Probably not necessary at all for the amount of power I'm going to be putting down with this thing. I mean, eventually I'll turbo the thing, or maybe put a centrifugal supercharger on it, and maybe we'll make like 600 or 700 horsepower from the Suburban. It's not like I'm going sled pulling or anything, but you know, I have seen a lot of really high power sled pull trucks that have ladder bars on them. They'll actually twist the center section from the axle tube, and basically what happens is, you know, when you mount like a ladder bar to the axle tube's not going anywhere, but the center of the differential still has a tendency to want to climb up under acceleration. And I have seen these factory spot welds shear off, allowing the center to climb. So anyway, just a simple precaution, because we're in here, I welded the whole axle tube into the housing. Obviously I ground it smooth because I wasn't a fan of how it looked. My MIG welds are not the greatest, but a little bit of grinding work later, we have a much stronger and pretty clean looking setup. Welded both sides in, and also I took the time to install the brakes on the passenger side. And this is kind of what it's going to look like over there when we're all done. So we've got new everything. We've got new calipers, parking brake hardware, caliper brackets, rotors, the whole 9 yards. It's all painted up. I even got a new parking brake lever. You can kind of barely see it down there. This is the bunch of parts that I am going to be installing. That's just for kind of a cool comparison. Old stock, rusty backing plates. These are Dorman backing plates. Not sure the part number, but just about every part store in the country probably, oh, right there, probably can get those. And also, just a quick side note, I am pretty sure that the same brakes and hubs and stuff will work on the Dana 70 that they will on the AAM 11.5. Not positive, that's a hunch that I have. Anyhow, backing plates. This is Powerstop stuff here, the caliper bracket and the caliper. That's the stock axle bracket, or whatever you want to call it, all cleaned up. Stock hub, I'll start by pressing the studs into that. Press the studs in that hold the backing plate onto the backing plate bracket. And then over here, I've got the rest of the brake stuff. We've got some new parking brake shoes, got some new regular brake pads, the little rubber thingy for the arm. That's another rotor in there, wheel seal, and finally another little parking brake actuator arm. As you can see, this one is pretty free, where the original one is basically rusted solid. So this is going to be a 100% brand new axle, and as soon as we get this side done over here, it'll be ready to put back in the truck. All right, real quick, I wanted to explain the RTV silicone on the spindle seal because this will probably come up in the comments. Normally, if you have a seal that spins on a shaft or something like that, you cannot put any sort of sealant on it. But this design of axle uses a two-piece seal. So if you check it out here, this kind of metal part here, this is the outer surface. This is fixed or driven into the spindle. And this inner surface here, this will be fixed to the spindle. And if I can kind of spin it there, you can, it's hard to do with one hand, but this seal, yeah, you can see the seal actually spins and the spinning part is made between these two surfaces. And this inner spindle surface here is a little bit rusty, so just to make sure it doesn't leak, we got some RTV on there. Normally, if this was a one-piece seal, you could not put RTV silicone on the spindle like that. Well, with the brakes fully installed, we're more or less ready to test fit this Chevy Express van Dana 70 underneath our GMT400 Suburban. Remember, it's a 2005 axle, 3500 single rear wheel, non-cutaway van if you're looking for one. And I was lucky enough to find a 410 limited slip. Of course, they made these in 373s. A lot of them were open differentials and some of them were 373 limited slips. So it's not like the Dana 70 is the rarest axle in the world, but obviously the one that I wanted, the 410 limited slip, that particular combination was pretty hard to find. So anyway, you noticed that I had taken the brake drum or brake rotor on and off a couple of times. More or less, that's just so I can adjust the parking brake shoes so that you can apply the parking brake by moving the lever just a real little bit. But also you want to have no drag when you're spinning the rotor when the parking brakes are not applied. Also, tightening up the wheel bearing, one thing worth mentioning there, I basically like to make sure the hub is fully seated and then tighten the nut just until it starts to touch. And then look at the little index or lock tabs on there and just kind of go tighten it until the next one lines up. Hopefully it's just like a 1/16 of a turn or a very little bit. You don't want a whole lot of preload on the bearings, but just tighten it ever so slightly until you get the little locking pin in there and the C-clip or retainer on the outside of that. The full floating hub or the axles just slide in and bolt in. Other than that, you know, this thing is pretty much ready to go. Like I mentioned, you will notice that the axle tubes themselves are not painted yet, and that's just because I want to double check that the angle of the spring perch will match the 14 bolt. Also, I think I covered this before, but basically we did move the perches from the van. We're out here. They're a little bit narrower on the GMT400. As far as brake hoses go, I do need to get these mounted up. I got them here. These are actually for a 2001 2500 HD instead of the Express van, but they'll work just the same. So the brake hoses kind of go and they attach right on there. And then finally, there's this tapped hole on the back of the parking brake bracket right down there that little bracket will bolt onto. Now, the only reason I don't have it on is simply because this has a coarse thread banjo bolt in it, and this one is fine thread, probably metric. But I'll just go down to the local parts store and grab something and get that in place. And then all I've got to do is build a hard line that goes from that connection there across the axle tube up to the top of the differential, and then it'll attach to the stock Suburban flex hose that goes from there up to the chassis. And that's basically what it takes to adapt a Chevy Express 1-ton van Dana 70 into a GMT400 Suburban, and I can't wait to get it in. Now, I do have another truck that's coming by. It's a F-150. We're doing an engine swap in. It's a Windsor. It's kind of old school, and it's going to make a whole lot of power, so I'm really excited about that one. It should be here any day now, but I hope I can at least have the time to get this axle underneath the Suburban. I don't even care if I get it running and driving, just at least if I get it under there so I can see what it looks like, because this axle has been sitting under my table pretty much since like January. So I'm really excited and happy to get it in. Do me a favor, guys, please click that like button if you enjoyed the content you saw today. Click the subscribe button if you want to see more cool truck content. We do a lot of technical stuff and the occasional race here and there. And then finally, drop a comment down below about maybe some things that you'd like to see in a future upload. So thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. My name's LT, and I'll catch you on the next upload.